we go.
Margaret, you can mute all if you need to.
Thank you.
And Margaret, you can also undo the waiting room, which will stop you from having to admit everyone. Once you're in the room, you can undo it.
Oh, thank you. But does that mean, and then when there's 100 people, it just stops?
It will just, yeah, it should stop, yeah. Otherwise, you'll be sitting there clicking 100 times.
How do I undo the waiting room, Patricia?
If you have host controls, you should be able to go to the More button.
Okay.
See, I don't have host controls here, but you should be able to go to the More button, and then it would say something like waiting room undo or disable waiting room.
Okay. Let me go and see.
Yeah. Good boy. Are you? You a really good boy? You were a really good boy. Your sister was the one. Yeah, she was in the number one last night.
Well, we're at 90 anyway, so they're all coming in. So we're almost there at 100.
Yeah, so mute everybody, Margaret, so we're good. Mute
okay,
all.
perfect.
We'll start.
Just figure out how to do
Sandra Lee wanted to be here, but she couldn't because her internet is down.
We're going to record it and post it on YouTube because we have a meeting limit of 100. So
you might want to repeat that thing about recording once 100 people are in.
Yeah. Well,
because that's really important in terms of what people might be comfortable sharing or not sharing,
yeah,
that it would be posted publicly.
Yeah, totally. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to start, and we'll when we're at 89. So I'm always good for starting meetings on time. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Ann Ortelee, and our co-host today is Margaret in Dublin and Laura Nalbandian. So we're gonna kind of start it off, and then we're gonna open it up to people to talk, and then go forward. Okay. So and again, this is the first. Hopefully, we get to a space where people, you know, we leave here with an action plan, and folks go forward. So. As you know, there's been a lot of astrology hubbub lately on the social media around sexual abuse, sexual assault, and inappropriate sexual behavior of a parent-student, a teacher-student, parent-child energy, which is completely inappropriate. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Then Margaret's going to talk about grooming, and then Laura's going to talk about it from the perspective of, you know, kind of vision where we're going, and then we're going to open it up to people to chat. We're going to ask that you please, if you have a story, don't share it on this, because this is going to be public. And this is really more like, how do we work with it going forward? That's really more the point of this. And obviously, recognizing that, you know, there are predators in the world, there are predators in the astrology community, and, you know, how do we work with this? So, my name is Ann Ortelee. I'm an astrologer in New York City, sitting here at the bright red desk, which you can't see, but I've been an astrologer now for 26 years. And when I first came in the community back then, 1994, people actually told me who the predators were. And I knew about it before I went out into the world. I've had students who have been preyed on. I've had my staff members have been preyed on. And, you know, and so in the journey that I've traveled for 26 years in the astrology community, every time one of my students, or in the case of my staff member, she was preyed on before she came to work for me, I was like, you have to report this. You have to do something. Yeah, I have Pluto in the 7th. I'm like, I'm good with, you know, no, you know, the unacceptable behavior. So I think part of that is this journey here we're on as a group. We have a number of astrology organizations. My thought when I talked to Margaret about this was something similar to the whole thing about defunding the police. One of the protocols that they're suggesting for that is that there's an extra body, a body external to the local police departments, which is going to keep a list of people that prey. And in the sense of, you know, like if you move from, you're a cop and you do something bad in a small town and you go to another small town and you get hired, but nobody knows your background. And that's an option that we can talk about and how we would do it. The second thing is, you know, an ethical honor pledge thing where people say, hey, this is I pledge this, and it's going to be different from teacher-student, astrologer-client, but they have similarities. The teacher-student one is a little more prone to abuse because in my experience hearing this tales from my students, it has been more of a grooming, which is what predators do. Margaret's going to talk about that because she's a therapist. And then my thought is people, this is a voluntary thing, obviously, not a lot of ways to enforce it, but we can, as a community, in the same way I was warned, we can share that knowledge more publicly. And how we do that, that's part of what you guys are going to say. This is as a community how we want to do it. So that's part of the process. So we're going to ask at the end of this for people to step up and say, yes, I'm interested in this section, that section, or the other. We also have organizations in the astrology community, so we're going to ask them to support this. And they all have ethics clauses, but you know, having been a member of the OPA board, I know we posted something about somebody and we got a letter that we were going to sue, we get sued. So they took it right down. And I'm kind of like, no, this guy actually assaulted, you know, somebody I know. No, like I know he does this. So you know, I think part of it's that. And then Laura's going to speak also to, you know, her pledge as the NORWAC coordinator, because she runs one of the most successful astrology conferences in the country. She's going to speak to her posture on that. So that's the idea. And we would request that people that are here, you know, don't share names of people. And it is going to be posted on YouTube. So we would, it'll be available for other people who are interested in watching it as we form. So a couple of steps. We're going to do an overview now. Then we're going to talk about the action plans, which are, you know, how do we set it up and where do we go? And then people that are interested at the end of this in working on it, go. And we do have a lot of people from all ages and all categories in the spectrum. There also are financial abusers. And we're not looking at making this really wide. We're really looking at the areas that we're focusing on here and here, which is the sexual and the financial. And then, you know, as other things come up, making this a growing organization where we go, oh, that's a problem too. And if you feel, oh no, we need to add a third or fourth, that this will be your opportunity to pipe up and say it. But also recognizing that one of the things that happens when community gets together is, and we are entering the age of Aquarius, right? Where the group says, hey, that's not acceptable behavior, and we aren't going to put up with it anymore. Or we're gonna let people know you do it. And then that's a consequence. And of course, how we do that is, you know, that's to be decided. And part of the reason the organizations have helped with this, and Laura will speak to this about taking somebody down who's a good astrologer, but it's also, you know, the society has gotten clearer on things. So when we watched Bill Cosby's rape allegations, the women that accused him said, hey, back when that happened, there wasn't a thing called date rape. I thought I did it. I thought it was my fault. I thought I somehow caused it. And of course, there is a tendency to blame victims, which we're going to try and not do. We're going to say this is the appropriate behavior. You know, this one is a little bit harder because you're not going to necessarily, this is from Richard and Vicki, my training in ESAR, you know, that above the blow as opposed to equal and working together. So it's kind of collaborative and working in a structure that helps everybody. And so that's the plan. And now I will turn it over to Margaret, and she will pipe up and talk about her part about grooming and how this stuff goes down.
Just very briefly, my other work is a psychotherapist. I've got an MSW, which I got in the States many years ago. And over the years, I've worked both as a psychotherapist and a social worker. And I worked a lot with child sexual abuse, rape crisis centers, various domestic violence, and so on. And the one thing I've seen over the years in every situation, in every culture, in every country I've worked with, is the whole process of grooming, that predatory behavior is quite a plan, sorry, I'm setting somebody in, is something that doesn't usually just happen. Usually there's a whole process behind it that builds up to it, where somebody is targeted and they are chosen for whatever reason. And then there's often a whole process that goes with it. So I think we need to be aware of this, because part of the process is often kind of trying to make the person feel responsible for what is going on, which makes it very hard for the person who is being abused to actually come forward, to know where to go, to who to go, to how to say something. And because there can be that feeling of, what did I do? You know, somehow I've caused this. And then, you know, the thing is that when that happens within a community setting, there's also the fear then of other people victim blaming and victim shaming them, that somehow, you know, people will turn around and say, oh, but, you know, the other person, whether it's a teacher or a practitioner, but they're such a good person and they've done so much good for the community and they're such a wonderful person and they probably didn't really mean it, and maybe you misunderstood, or maybe there was consent there, or maybe, which of course then duplicates the abuse and makes it even worse. So just to be really aware of that this is not something that happens out of the blue, and that as a community, we need to be aware of how to support anybody who has been through this process and how to help them in it. That's really all I wanted to say at this point.
Okay. Yeah, and the other part of it is, you know, I mean, I'm old. I'm not old. I'm 65, but I have students and assistants, and I say something, oh, well, that just seems like a bad date. And I get it from them. They're like, no, that's inappropriate behavior. So we also recognize the society has changed. And then part two, there's a lot of happy astrology marriages out there. We're not saying don't date your astrologer or don't date somebody in the community, but recognizing that that has to be a consensual act. And in my case, one of my teachers did subsequently marry one of the students in my class, but they handled it, the teacher was a therapist, they handled it in a very professional manner, discontinued teaching, you know, shifted the relationship dynamic, paused, and then, you know, they're now have been together 22 years. So not saying you can't do that, that's not what this is, but it's also saying that what are the processes and the steps to do appropriate bonding as opposed to inappropriate with grooming or dating somebody and getting them to give you a lot of money. You know, there was an astrologer who did that. And, you know, I warned one of my students who was a triple Pisces, didn't want to hear it, but he got money out of her too. So I think we want to kind of honor how we can do this in a collective way. So now we're going to turn it over to Laura. And you're going to unmute her, Margaret, if you could.
Oh, I'm unmuted. I can do it, but thank you.
Yeah.
So, gosh, I don't know where I want to start. I want to say that this, having been involved in the astrological community since a young woman, and I'm talking 16, 17, when my mother opened an astrological bookstore back in the 70s, I have watched variations of this behavior for, well, I'm 61 now, so it's a lot of years. I've watched this behavior for a lot of years. My mother, Margaret Nalbandian, Maggie, had taken some steps at Norwalk many years ago when things came to light, but it was still swept under the carpet. And although some people I've seen say you need to handle this privately, my mother did handle it privately. And that person was banned from our conference. And that was the agreement to never come back. I have also removed people from our conference, attendees who were predatory. But my point is that it is a systemic issue. There is so many threads to this. There is the astrologer in the community as a teacher at conferences, who I've watched these astrologers come in sort of predatorily look for sex. They troll for sex at conferences and find willing women, but it still does damage. I've seen participants, attendees, who do the same thing, but they're at a different narrative, meaning they're not the astrologer in the community, but still inappropriate behavior. Heard from many women who have felt uncomfortable at Norwalk. I certainly keep an eye out for this. In talking with Margaret and Anne, some ideas that came to mind. First of all, there are many things that need to be done, but one idea that certainly has come to my mind is that out of this comes a clear, defined narrative, a policy, an ethics about this particular issue that is agreed upon collectively, hopefully, and that then astrology conferences start using. I have committed to having NORWAC use what comes out of this, and that we would hope and ask and put some pressure on the major organizations to adopt, whether it's a paragraph or 2 paragraphs of this particular narrative into their ethics documents, and request that they be more publicly promoting that particular section. I have noticed that there are sexual harassment sections in certain ethics documents, but they do not cover this particular experience, which has been going on a long time, which is the imbalance of power dynamics and the misuse of that power dynamic in a sexual way, a monetary way, a usury way, and there are many different forms of that. And so what we'd like to do is to be able to have a consistent voice, a document or a number of paragraphs, whatever it comes out to be, that is consistent across the board, that is accepted across the board by all. I think leading from that then comes, as Patricia, and I'd certainly like Patricia to talk about it, Patricia Walsh, to talk about what she posted just a bit ago into the chat room about the Better Business Bureau. Certainly, how do we then deal with violations of that are respectful on all sides, so that we do not serve as a vigilante board in any way. We live in a country where there is due process, and I would hope that we would have due process. We need voices heard. And then because we do not have some kind of organized body that, say, the medical profession has, a dentistry profession, you name it, lawyers, whoever, they have a body that deals with and sanctions people. We don't have that. So what we would have to have is something that Anne has mentioned, which is basically letting people know, after vetting the information, who has transgressed. Please be careful of them and make your choices based on the information that is available. So I would like to hear what Patricia Walsh has to say, if Margaret and Anne are okay with that.
Yep. I would add to that one of the things that we recognized is, there is no bar association for astrologers, and anybody can hang a shingle up and practice their craft. So I'm always like, get certified, do your, prove you know what you're doing. But I think this would be a voluntary thing where people would say, yes, I take that pledge, and I know somebody's going to go, oh, it's like that virginity pledge. I'm like, no, I take the pledge. I'm not going to abuse my students. I take the pledge. I'm not going to abuse my clients. And we have a registry of people that say, I don't do this. And that also becomes a resource when people do something where you look and say, hey, how come you're not on there? And the person goes, well, because I plan on seducing you later today. I think that's an option for us too, because then it becomes a movement and it's our way of joining, and you can look and see who's in my area in the same way I do on AFAN or AFA. I can look and see who are the astrologers in New York that are certified. So I think that's an option, and I would want this organization to do that. And now let's turn it over to Patricia Walsh. Patricia, unmute yourself. Oh, you're muted. Unmute yourself. There we go.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you. Laura and I, of course, have been talking about this with our other colleague, Rose Marcus, because we teach a school together as well, this is something that it needs to be integrated in our training in school. And as all schools should. But I also, because 20 years, I've been teaching regression therapy internationally and run an international organization. I belong to an organization where this model stands. So there are models for it is one thing I just want to get across. All of the things that you all have mentioned are part of those models and then some. So what I've made notes on this because what I would like to just put forward, these are my ideas. That an independent body exists that could be ethics, international ethics in astrology or something like that, that there's guidelines posted of what is abuse, what are ethics. These are going to involve, and again, you know, organizations exist for this in the regression world. And if you're a regression school or a practitioner, you get a little badge that you put on your page. I mean, you know, people aren't that used to it because in astrology, people can be very rogue about setting up their practice. So it's something that can be put forward as a kind of badge of honor if you have this. But things that I feel need to be addressed are about what I would call, you can use psychological language or energetic language, but it's the dynamics of power between student and teacher and client and therapist, as we know, or client and counselor. As we know, those are very nuanced. So I do believe that those need to be brought out. About handling projection, positive and negative. That's for the practitioner and for clients to understand that they may positively project on somebody and that can be misused. There might be, I know that there are education courses for astrologers. We may, if we form some kind of organization, I think it would be valuable to have different people's voices, have maybe YouTube videos or something, some trainings posted that can deal with all of these different things like power dynamics, like transference, how to hand back transference, all of those things. The other things that need to come into play in this conversation is privacy and non-disclosure, about how, and this includes in the age of social media, this includes, you know, counselors or therapists or whatever. I'm sorry, I intermix the words because I bridge two worlds too. As astrological consultants about, you know, how sacred space is created and must never be violated. And that includes, part of that is privacy and non-disclosure. Also, another thing that can be brought into it is supervision. This is one thing that doesn't exist. So if somebody, and I posted before about a Better Business Bureau kind of model, which may get away from the liability issues of posting people's names, et cetera. But the Better Business Bureau does it. People post complaints, they write to the Bureau. The Bureau has an overseeing body that has a set of, this is how we review complaints. And then they either recommend some kind of reparation or whatever, or they say this was not solved, you know, this complaint is still outstanding. So then people can make their own judgment, right? But the other thing, hold on, I had one more note because I've been making notes on this. Yeah, supervision. I mean, I think that this is something that the board can offer, that if a complaint is brought against somebody, or if somebody finds themselves in a very difficult transference space, that they can confidentially go to supervision with somebody. And these things can be worked out. So that's a safe space for people that are also struggling, that are in a position of power and are struggling with those power dynamics. That's just my immediate thoughts. I'm sure there's a lot more to come. Thank you.
Yeah, Patricia and I have been talking about this almost on a regular basis since, pardon me, the shit hit the fan. And so it's...
well, it's been a longer discussion than that, as we've seen it arising in the astrology world, and
we have been talking about it for a while.
Yeah.
And I know women have been talking about this for years. In amongst themselves. And I think, you know, time's up. You know, it's time for us to take action and not feel because overall it can feel helpless, right? Because we don't have a centralized, organized body, that it can feel daunting and helpless to take any action. But I think that we've had enough, and it's time to do something. It may not come out perfect in its first iteration, but that doesn't mean it can't be perfected as it moves forward.
Yeah, I can send the statement from the European Association for Regression Therapy. And the reason why I draw on that, and I think it's a useful model to draw on, is because many people are regression people that are not MSWs, they're not, I train people that are not that they're not psychologically certified. It doesn't mean that somebody can't be a good regression therapist, but it's involved in the training. The training is there and the supervision is there and the case study reporting is there. So that's why, non-therapists can do that kind of work if it's a, well-run program. But that's why I think their model is useful, because yes, it draws from that standard understanding in the counseling world, but it also addresses people that are not, classically trained therapists.
Right, and I think that's important.
I think one of the problems is that all of this is subject, like somebody put a comment in the comment section, subject to people wanting to be part of something, wanting to be subject to something. And I think that's the problem with all the organizations, that a lot of people are on the outside and don't really belong to anything and really are not answerable to anything. I think that Anne's idea of, everybody kind of making a pledge to be respectful and to, obviously not abuse their students and so on, is kind of, it bypasses all of that. It kind of makes it very simple that if somebody's name is not on that list, then, we're going to question why aren't they on that list. So I think that might be maybe a good starting point, because we're such a mixed group all over the place, and it's just so hard to kind of almost bring everybody in, because we say we're a community, but we're not really a community. We're a lot of individual people doing our own thing. And some people are part of organizations and communities, and a lot of people aren't. And also, as an organization, it's hard to really impose anything on anyone, whether it's ESA or NCGR or OPA or any other organization, because there's no teeth to it. And I think that's been one of the problems. Whereas I think Anne's idea of people putting their name up, that doesn't have to have teeth behind it. But maybe Anne, you can say a bit more about that.
Well, I was kind of thinking of it like a Yelp review, for lack of a better word. You take the pledge, you say I'm on, I say I'm not going to do that. So as astrologers, then you say to people, hey, they're not on the list. You should ask them why not, right? Because once it gets out, people can sign up. And also the Better Business Bureau does take complaints from people that aren't registered in the BBB. But the second part of it is, as a public thing, obviously investigating is all well and good, and I'm totally for it. But one of the things we always hear from the boards is that takes time. How do we do it? So I think it's making it a forum. If you've signed up and you've done bad behavior, and someone complains about you, you have an opportunity in the same way my diner does. Sorry, your eggs were bad, come back again, or an opportunity, which we've been watching, depending on how accurately we've been following the social media, we've been watching it play out. Well, now he said this and now she said that. So it would be a place for that to be recorded. And it would be a place for people to hop in and, kind of like the Karen channel, where they videotape the Karens going crazy, and apologies to any Karens I know. You're all upset that your name is being misused, including Whoopi Goldberg. But, you can go watch Karen porn. You can come here and say, what's bad behavior in the astrology community. And not that would be the only thing, but it would also be that we say this is unacceptable behavior in our world, and how do we do it? And of course, we have a couple things to think about. People that had happened to a while back, right? It's always interesting. You watch how the universe shows. So I was reading an interview about Thandie Newton, and she was saying, I'm publishing my book after I die, because I was a little black girl that was abused and nobody thought I'd be famous. But I'm going to publish it after I die so nobody can complain about it. And then, of course, she mentioned somebody who they contacted who said, that never happened, that never happened. And so, I think that he said, she said, I mean, we don't know what happens. But, what I've observed is it tends to be a pattern. It's not just this student, it's that student. I had 5 women that I knew of who had been financially taken advantage of by this astrologer. So when my student started dating him, and she was a triple Pisces, I was like, don't give this, it's great to date him, I get it, but don't give him any money. So I can do it on an individual level, but as teachers, as other astrologers, we can all say, hey, go check, are they on that list? And when the person goes, no, they're not, you want to say, well, you probably want to ask them why they're not. Because if the criteria for being on that list is if you do bad behavior, we're going to talk about it, and everybody agrees that that's the deal. If they didn't shine up, then you're going to ask, why didn't they? That becomes the criteria, because it's very easy. I just agree, I'm not going to steal your money, and I'm not going to sexually abuse you. You can't say that, and you can't agree to that, then okay, why not? And that part, I think, can be one side, very straightforward, then the ethics piece, and then talking to the communities about, what our posture is going forward, that as a group, we step forward and we say, hey, this needs to stop. We get it. We're not denying regular romance, but we are denying the inappropriateness. And if you do want to have a date with your client, these are the steps you need to do. But using astrology as a seductive tool, which a few people have talked about and published videos about, that's, like, oh, you have a bad son, you're going to be, you're never going to succeed, and then it ruins you. And then how do you handle that? That's also the other part, is bad astrology. Like when people are using astrology as a predatory tool, I have a real problem with that. So that's my purpose in this space. So, okay, so other?
As a Capricorn and an organizer.
Yes.
Yes.
That's why you're here, Laura.
Yes. Sun in Capricorn, Mercury in Capricorn, conjunct Saturn in Capricorn. Almost, there's a lot of it in the 6th house. I get down to the details, and building a plan. And I know that talking about things is also a very important element of this. So that sort of just brainstorming, ideas come out in that. But I then need to come down to a plan. And so we're talking, there's a couple of things. There's possibly a website. There's possibly that has to be expensed, or in some way. And developed, that's time, money, which is okay. That I don't want people to get hung up on the monetary element of that, because I think there are enough astrologers in the community who, if they're interested and make good money, I'm one of them, we can certainly bring this together. I'm fading in and out of, and it's making me nuts. I'm going to put on my other camera.
Mercury's not quite out of its shadow.
Oh, there it is. Which one are you? There it is. So I'm still talking, but that's good. All right. So, there's a website. There is a group coming together to decide what goes on that. I think that something that Patricia brought up really sticks with me, and that's a narrative of possible PSAs by a number of well-known astrologers that then goes onto multiple YouTube channels of prominent astrologers, even if they're not the one that produced the PSA. And I think PSAs might be a really good, but it has to be flushed out into social media, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all of that. I think we need to have voices of multiple generations, multiple race, and so on, who voice and speak to the different generations.
And the nuances of the issue is based, like you're saying, public education, because that can be a point of the organization. right?
Right.
So different nuances of it as well.
Right. So the PSAs, I think, actually might be, because look, if we just serve as the punishment arm of this, I'm not happy with that.
No, I don't want to.
I would like to educate the astrological community, students, men and women, about what is appropriate, what can they expect from their astrologer in terms of if they're attracted to them, the student being attracted to the teacher, which happens. I've had multiple students over the years who were attracted to me, and we sat down and had conversations about it and dealt with it. And
But this is, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Laura.
No,
This is what I meant by supervision, because it can be on both sides.
Yeah.
So people can offer their services for, let's say, you know, a 30-minute talk for you know, for a fee for people that are struggling with these dynamics, be they students, teachers, clients, whatever.
I like that.
Yeah, and I know when I was young and I got hit on by a client, I didn't know what to do. And I went to my astrology teacher at the time. It was a very Capricorn guy, John Marcusell, and he said, can't read them, can't teach them, got to sever the relationship. And then, you know, that, you know, no, I'm like, okay, got it, got the rules. Because I didn't know what to do. And he was very clear. And I was like, got it. And so I think that needs to be included totally. And it's not a punishing organization. It's addressing a bigger concept of how do we do it. So the goal here is for people to feel like, yes, I want to step forward, and I agree. I'm not going to do. So punishing is going to definitely drive folks from it. So I think keep going, Laura, with your points. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. What I'm putting this on my list, Patricia. What would we call that? Would you say that's, you know?
I would call it a supervision or a consultation.
It's really a place where, and this again has to be a list of astrologers that you can reach out to who have training in this to say,
yeah,
I've got this situation with a student, or and I need some strategies on how to effectively deal with this. So,
right.
Yeah, and we know that, as Danny pointed out in the chat room, it is nuanced, that we are dealing with very obvious transgressions right now.
Right.
They are very obvious. That is the transgression and the erosion of the boundary between a student and a teacher, right? And that is our main topic right now, but it is not the only piece. We know there are nuances of how abuse shows up, whether it's financial, whether teachers or astrologers take advantage of their students who are willing to volunteer time and into in whatever way that might show up. There needs to be a fair exchange. I mean, there's all kinds of issues, and those will necessarily need to be addressed. So this is not the absence of all of this.
Yeah, we'll set it up and say, okay, starting here, we go here, and then from there, it can flow out. And in some cases, the supervision can be part of the governing bodies, you know, the other astrology communities where, you know, you say, hey, go, and those guys can pick it up because they have a structure in place for certification that does include ethics training and how that works. So there's things we can definitely do here. And part of this is also talking to folks like where you want to volunteer. So we've had a request to save the chat, so we will. And there are org people here now. So if anybody would like to talk, Margaret, you want to call on some folks, or?
Yeah, I'm wondering if Michelle Gould would like to say anything, because Michelle is the chair of ethics for ESAR.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited that we're having the conversation. One of the problems that, and I'm relatively new to taking over this role, so actually Margaret has more experience than I do. But yeah, the problems I think the orgs have faced have been there's no teeth, right? When there are trespasses, there are no teeth. We don't have a licensing board. We can't take away someone's license, which tends to be the big stick. So I love the, so it has been education as much as you can. And someone I saw in the chat where someone was saying ethics should be offered every conference. Well, it actually has been for a while, at least through ESAR. I know OPA does a lot of it too. But it's getting people into those classes too, so the awareness, the PSA, I think the PSA videos is a smashing idea.
Yeah, because then it lives on, and you can say, go watch video 10.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
It's a really good idea because it's consciousness raising and it's education, and it's people don't have to go to a conference, right, to get that information.
Yeah, and some people don't. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, that would be. I'm here to listen and take in the ideas. I'd love to be involved and support in any way I can because it's an important it's an issue dear to my heart.
I think as we move forward, what we're going to need to do is form the working committee. And in that working committee, be open and available to the community for ideas. So not everybody has the time to work on something, but I think that, so it's not an insular group deciding. I think that once a core team, which takes input from the community and puts it together, then flushes it back out into the community as a document. But I am really loving, I think these PSAs will be something that will be huge. And it's part of the working committee that can organize how those PSAs maybe are done, or pick people, or look for volunteers who want to do that. We need a consistent message. A PSA works because there's a consistent message in it. Right? So there. All right.
Okay. Anybody else want to pipe up and talk? Margaret, call on people.
Sam, did you want to say anything before you leave?
Yes, let me also declare. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I just said in the chat that I also will volunteer myself to do the PSA as another cishet man to state something about it. So I support that initiative and some of the other ones that have been listed. I'm glad this conversation is happening. I also think what's important is that we're going beyond the orgs. I've debated a few of you about, the limitations of the orgs, especially related to the legal implications of it. But I think we can talk about this as a community. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. So that's all I wanted to say, and thank you.
Thanks a million, Sam. And Madeline, I think you have your hand up to say something.
Yes, I did. This has been a really extraordinary moment. Other professions had theirs, a few years ago. This has come really too late. But for me, I like that idea of the public service announcement because I just wanted to support that. I think empowerment is the key here, that people have choices. And, sometimes things happen. As Laura pointed out, somebody was attracted to her. These things are inevitable. That's human nature. That's part of the dynamic, especially when, your charts are meshing with someone else. We know this, but it is up to the astrologer to say, no, this is a boundary that can't be crossed. But it's also up to the person to know, maybe I'm more susceptible to this because we're in this arrangement. Maybe, and that they can say no if they are preyed upon. So I just, this is so important. And especially the financial piece, I hadn't even thought about that until this morning. The sexual thing, I think a lot of us know who who these people are. I come from that generation. I've been doing this since the late 70s. So, you know, I come from that generation where it wasn't uncommon, and you didn't speak up the way that people do now. And sometimes I think, well, when you talk about things that happened 40, 50 years ago, is it right to sort of judge something by today's standards as opposed to then? But the more important point is what's happening now. What's happening now? And I just love this notion of public service announcements, of keeping some sort of track. As a former head of an organization, we had ethics complaints and we dealt with them. But again, once it's dealt with, it's like, who cares? There's nothing, there's no, somebody used the word chief. There's no chief. We have no power over anything. So anyway, I support this work. I'm happy to help in whatever way I can. I have lots of resources at Astrolabe. I believe that maybe Astrolabe, we get lots and lots of visitors, people who consult astrologers and whatever. We have a huge mailing list, so I believe we can be very helpful. And I'm offering that. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
Thanks, Madeline. I think Martha has her hand up there.
Hi, yes, thank you. I wanted to introduce myself first of all. I'm an astrologer. I learned from my mother when I was about 13, so I'm not a person who went through any particular schools, though I've taken classes and gone to some conferences. But I've been doing astrology for 40 years. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, and I've been a licensed massage therapist, two areas where ethics is extremely important and where they've worked hard on putting together their code of ethics for both in-person and for telehealth. And having worked for 40 years in a lot of different environments, I think that having some sort of a code as well, that kind of lays out expectations for how people behave would be really important, and I would definitely be interested, having worked with ethics in a number of different institutional settings, as well as private practice, in being involved with that. So, particularly since I'm from two fields that specifically have issues around ethics. So if there's some way that I can be engaged and involved, I would very much like to do that.
Thank you so much, Martha. That's wonderful. We have two people with their hands up. I'm conscious we don't have much time. So we've got Omari and then Kay. So Omari.
And Deb McBride, she's had her hand up too. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Margaret. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And Laura, how are you? Nice to see you. Yes, you are pretty. So I'm very happy to see that this conversation is taking place. I saw the email yesterday and I was like, oh my God, what happened? And I remember something from a few years ago like this happened at a retreat at OPA. I think the public service announcement is a great idea. At this time, I'm not able to commit any additional time to this effort because I'm so busy, but please count me as a supporter. When the public service announcement is available, let me know. I don't have a huge following like many of you, but I'll certainly transmit that public service announcement via my social media platforms. And so, Margaret, thank you for acknowledging me, and have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you, Omari. Can we go on to Kay and then Deb? Kay?
Unmuting. Okay, sorry about that. So I just want to thank you guys for bringing this all together. For me, it's just being president of OPA for like a month and realizing how challenging it is within the nonprofit organization to, you know, bring something together, like you said, to have teeth, to, you know, figure out what we're doing with this. It helps so much to get all the organizations together and also try to pull in people who are not part of organizations so that the work we do here to change things really matters and moves through our whole field. And I love the idea of the public service announcements. I love to think that there's going to be some decent levels of teaching and educating so that we can shift the culture.
Thank you, Kay. That's wonderful. And Deb, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks so much. And thanks for inviting me and thanks for having this meeting. I'm more out of the loop now because I live in Costa Rica, but before I used to, I was on the NCGR board in New York City. And in 2001, I was stalked by a member of the community, and it was not a teacher or anyone. And I immediately went to the board. You know, it was during the summer of 2001, so we weren't having meetings, nobody was around. And while I spoke to the board about it, it became a big problem. And there was really nowhere to go about it because at the time, like, this was a definite clinically crazy person who was in the community coming to our events, and he showed up at my house uninvited. He sent me crazy letters. I went to the New York City police. They didn't want to know. They were saying things like, well, did you date this guy? I said, of course not. And they said, well, are you sure? I said, of course I'm sure. But the problem became that the board got very divided about it. And the president of the organization, who was also my teacher, was trying to counsel this person and calm them down and try to do a nice handling of them, when I was saying, you got to ban this guy because if it's not me, it's going to be somebody else. And it was very hard to get that point across. And I'm glad something like this is happening because there should be a way to just say, this is inappropriate, show them the letters. I had crazy letters, and somebody says, okay, you can't attend, etc. And John Marcasella, Anne's Capricorn, came up with, okay, he gets X amount of banning time. If he acts up again, then he is permanently thrown out. And that's what happened. But we went to national, they didn't want to know. You know, it really became this source of issue in the community. And I did not feel safe to even go to like a library night or a gathering because this guy would show up despite what we told him. And so, you know, eventually he left the community, but it was definitely a case of someone who was clinically crazy and obviously crazy. And still I felt really unprotected.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm sorry you went through that. That sounds pretty awful, actually.
Yeah.
And Deb, I had the same thing happen here in Seattle back in the 90s. I actually had to go to court and get a no contact order. Right. And I was either the vice president or the president of the local association. This guy was in the association. And maybe I was the I can't remember. It was back in the day. And I asked two very prominent male astrologers, because this guy was tracking me around the room and he trapped me in the kitchen of this place. Sure. And I came out and said, I don't feel safe enough to ask him to leave and confront this. I need you guys to stand behind me or stand in front of me and ask this guy to leave. And neither of them would. And these are prominent astrologers who I considered my friends. I said, if you don't ask him to leave, I'm leaving. And so I had to leave. And so I understand where you're coming from, and thankfully the guy actually followed the no contact order, but he did show up at a lecture the day after the contact order ended, but after that there was no contact. So these things do happen. I am not sure. I believe that the organizations and again, conferences, if somebody comes to me at NORWAC and says, this person has been tracking me, following me, doing something, then I take action. But it's my private conference and I can do that. It gets a little trickier for the organizations, but nonetheless, something still needs to be done. That is something that needs to be included at some point here. I do want to make a statement into the general room here that I will make a list and create a MailChimp mailing list of those who want information on this. But if you want to be part of or volunteer, please don't put your email in the chat room, although I see lots of them going in. Please email it to me at LauraNalbandian@gmail.com. That'll be the most functional way for me to gather the emails. Make sure you're telling me what you're wanting to do and how you're wanting to participate so we get a clear understanding of how you wish to engage with us. If you want to do a PSA and again, have a fairly decent platform, whether it's social media, YouTube, whatever, we will collect those as well in terms of people wanting to do PSAs. This all needs to be organized. This is what I do for a living. I'm an organizer. It's ingrained in my cells. So I'm happy to do this. I have the time to do this. This is a passion of mine. And NORWAC will be stepping up in lots of different ways. We plan to do a panel on this at NORWAC 2021. If we have an in-person conference, we still don't know that yet because we don't know what's happening in our country. That's another conversation. But nonetheless, we will have that panel. We will also be having a panel on diversity in astrology. NORWAC wants to be a leader in this process. So I think that we need to get people on board in this way. So contact me, let me know how you want to be involved, send me your email.
And if you wrote to Margaret, or sometimes some people posted this on Facebook, so we don't have your email, but if you wrote to Margaret or I, we have your emails and we'll be forwarding them to Laura, and you'll be getting a copy of we're going to load this recording up on YouTube, and you'll be getting a copy of the location for it, you know, to be able to go watch it and share it with your friends. But also, if you have ideas, we saw a lot of stuff going through the chat room. You know, feel free. This is the forming of a new organization that will hopefully work well and serve us as a community. And so if you wrote to Margaret and I, we have your emails already, and I've got, my assistant has them in, already transferred them into a Excel spreadsheet. So I'll send them to Laura, so you'll get a link. If you came another way, we don't have your email. But we will put this up on Facebook, that, you know, where the YouTube is, and then, you know, we'll commence. If you look at the chart, it's a nice chart. Moon in Taurus, trining Saturn in Capricorn. Laura's the Capricorn. And then we also have Mars Chiron conjunction. We also have a Mars Chiron conjunction, which is taking action against the wounding. So I think that's a good chart for, I cast it for 11 o'clock US, but technically Margaret's running it in Dublin, so I haven't looked at the Dublin.
And
So
I love the idea Patricia put out. I think we can be a membership org with minimal 25-year membership for practitioners to cover the cost. I'm happy to seed the beginnings of this in some way and look for others to step up and support and seed this moving forward.
Yeah,
and we can get some people to volunteer, make a little logo, make a website. We've got a big community. A lot of people want to help, and you know, we can corral all of this wonderful energy and talent to push this forward. And I hear what organizations are saying, and we understand, but I think that together with an overarching body that organizations can come underneath, and there can be mutual support, that something really big can happen here. And I also think with the tools that we have today, as so many people have been saying, social media, blah, 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 message boards, all of these things can be created and harnessed that haven't necessarily been harnessed in this direction, in this concentrated way before.
Yeah.
And one of the things that went by was whistleblowers being protected and not shaming. And I think one of the things, if you see someone who has posted that they had a bad experience, you know, your responsibility is to not shame, you know, because that's also how we shift the culture. And it helps, you know, it's recognizing you may think, well, why did you, and it's like, you know what, we don't need that anymore. We need, how are we going to help? What are we going to do? And I think our culture of killing off people, really, we want to take that Mars and Aries and shift it towards how do we help. And the good news is Sun opposite Athena, Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn this week. So big week for us to kind of set this up. It's got a nice chart to evolve with too. So we thank you all for coming.
Let me reiterate just one last time.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you. One is that I want you to people who want to be involved, I want you to email me with your email and let me know specifically how you want to participate. If you have talents or skills, because it looks like we're going to be establishing a new organization. I have skills on helping develop 501c3s, doing the paperwork, all that. We have stuff to do, but I need people to volunteer and let me know how you want to do that. Margaret.
Just to thank you all very much for giving your time up today to come here, and thank you for all your contributions. Now that I know how to save the chat, I will save it, so we'll also have that. And thank you, Laura, for everything, and thank you everyone for being here. And I'm sorry it's short, the hour's flown by. I know lots of you wanted to say something else, but this is just the start of the conversation, so there'll be more time. Thank you.
And so follow up, Laura, send it to her at gmail.com. Also, ideas for a name.
Yeah.
Throw those in. And things that you think should be included, because this is the forming time. So somebody gets to be Hamilton and write, and somebody gets to be Jefferson, and we'll go forward with that. Our organization.
And we'll have new names. We'll have women doing it.
Yeah. So any other questions, comments before we hang up and send you off to your lives?
And I want for the name. And I just want to thank you all for doing this. Really, really thank you all.
Thank you, Boaz.
Thank you for your courage, Nia. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Mwah. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura and everyone.
So we wish you all goodbye and thank you. And we'll be putting this up on the YouTube channel that we're going to set up in a few minutes. Well, we'll probably do it tomorrow. But,
thank you.
We'll harness the Taurus moon. So we're on the job. Right, so.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Thank you for sharing and spread the word. Because that's